So Exiles is pretty obvious in the next coming month. The question that's going to be asked a ton of is, will Path of Exile 2 flop or fail? It's a question that is always asked when it comes to a very big game release, and with Path of Exile 2 being a pretty monumental ARPG that has a ton of hype tied behind it, it's pretty clear that this question is going to come up a lot. So in today's video, I want to give you guys my personal impressions, opinions, and thoughts on why Path of Exile will or will not fail when the early access start in November the 15th and when the game inevitably releases whenever that date comes. Being a longtime player of Path of Exile, starting back in 2013, and even to this day I still play it pretty actively and really enjoy all the free seasonal updates that they provide, and on the other end, actually being a big fan of Diablo, specifically Diablo 2, and with Diablo 4 having a pretty solid update, it's pretty clear that I am a massive fan of the ARPG genre and have a lot of experience in both of these games. Those two games are going to have a ton of comparison, especially considering Diablo 4 has been commercially very successful as a title. It's definitely going to be a subject that's going to be broached a lot. Now, in order to answer the question if Path of Exile 2 is going to fail or flop, we need to talk about what Path of Exile 2 is bringing to the table over games like Path of Exile 1 and Diablo 4. Now, starting off with the most obvious and objectively the most important thing for a lot of gamers is the visuals of the game. One of the biggest complaints that I see a lot of when it comes to Path of Exile 1 is the game has very bad graphics and it looks very old. That is simply because the game was released back in 2013 and it actually is a fairly old game. They have had numerous updates to kind of try to keep the graphics on par with modern games, but obviously it's not enough, especially with the new gen of games releasing. And when you compare it to a game like Diablo 4, which actually looks really damn good, it definitely lacks in that area. Now obviously with all the showcases, the information, and pretty much everything related to Path of Exile 2 that we've seen, graphics on PoE 2 is pretty damn impressive to say the least, and by far the most graphically advanced ARPG available on the market, starting on November the 15th. If I'm being honest, this is objectively going to be one of the most important ways to get a lot of new players to actually jump into the game. Path of Exile is a very intimidating game in many other ways, but I do think that for the most casual players, new players, and just players in general who are going to be returning, having this massive graphical update is actually really great, and it actually solves one of the biggest shortcomings for Path of Exile 1. Now personally for me, one of the most annoying parts of playing Diablo 4 and Path of Exile 2 is the movement. In Path of Exile, it's not as bad because you can actually rebind in a really smart, meaningful way, but in Diablo, the key bindings and the way the game feels is a little off, especially on movement. And with Path of Exile 2, they actually revamped the whole movement system in a way that I think a lot of players are very interested in. If you're not aware, Path of Exile 2 is going with a full WASD option if you choose to, and from what I've seen from creators, for them, they feel like WASD is pretty damn massive and it actually feels better than anything they played in the past. Now from what I can tell, part of the reason why GGG actually delayed the launch of Path of Exile to early access on November the 15th was because they were actually redesigning the system to make it feel very functional and work for a lot of players. One of the biggest complaints for Diablo for a long time was not having the WASD movement. One of my personal complaints for Path of Exile was, once again, not having the WASD movement, because it actually does contribute to much smoother gameplay. And once again, the GGG team actually implemented this in a very smart way, which once again actually contributes to the game, in my opinion, being a pretty successful game. Now, moving on from some of the technical stuff to actual more gameplay focused things that really is going to set Path of Exile 2 apart from any other game available currently is the skill system. Now, one of the best things about Path of Exile 1, and somewhat annoying, is the skill system. Compared to other ARPG in the genre, you have a ton of skills, a ton of options, and pretty much every character can use whatever skill they desire. Obviously, some is more valuable to others depending on the type of archetype they are, but inherently you can play whatever you desire, which actually makes Path of Exile one of the best games for build diversity. With that in mind, because of the current system of Path of Exile where you have to put gems into individual slots of armor, it can be a little annoying for the average player to adjust to it, and in a lot of cases can stop progression in a way that actually feels kind of bad in my opinion. With that in mind, Path of Exile 2 actually made a pretty huge change in this and redesigned the entire skill system in a very smart way. You don't buy skill gems, you don't find them on the ground, you actually find uncut gems. These gems can be pretty much open into this huge menu where you can select specific gems that you want, and each of these uncut gems have a specific tier. At the moment, we don't know exactly what skills are tied to what tier, but ultimately what you're able to do is you'll be able to uncut gems, cut them, and then depending on the tier, you can get anything of tier or lower and socket that gem into your character specifically. Gems come with a random amount of slots, and these slots can be upgraded specifically from the gem rather than needing to put them directly on pieces of gear, which in my opinion is a much healthier system than we currently have in Path of Exile 1. Every character starts with 9 gem slots on the individual character, and as you progress, you're going to get more and more uncut gems, again contributing to more power on your character. I don't think it's much of a debate right now in terms of the ARPG genre that Path of Exile's build diversity is second to none, and with Path of Exile 2 making significantly more gems and making the system more friendly, I think it's pretty obvious that builds are going to be very strong in PoE 2 and objectively its strongest suit. Next, the other thing that's going to set Path of Exile 2 apart from pretty much every other ARPG is the skill tree. Now, for the average player, this can be a bit intimidating because how large it is, but one important thing to know about Path of Exile 2 compared to PoE 1 is that the passive tree has actually been revamped in a very smart way. As a melee focused player, one of the things that I path to a lot is basically life-based nodes, and that has been actively removed from the tree as far as I know of today. Why is this important that there's no more life on the tree? Well, the design philosophy behind the passive skills now are with the intention of making it so that players are not specifically going to the tree to make their characters do something that they otherwise wouldn't do, but more so complement what they already do with their skills and their gear. In a lot of cases in Path of Exile 1, you actually go to the passive skill tree to make up for a lot of your shortcomings. Of course, there's still a lot of nodes that actually bring benefit to what you already are good at, but in Path of Exile 2, they're putting a bigger emphasis on just making so that the passive tree complements you, not necessarily carry you. On top of this, the passive skill tree is actually going to feature some pretty awesome keystones. One that I know of that's very interesting to me that is actually kind of a throwback to Diablo 3 if I'm not mistaken, but you're actually able to dual wield two-handed weapons, which is actually a really awesome thing that I really loved in Diablo 3. Now, the skill tree obviously is going to still be very intimidating to new players, which I will be trying to break that down in future videos, so maybe subscribe for that. But keep in mind that the PoE team is actually contributing to making the game feel a lot better, but it's pretty clear with the rework on the passive tree is already going to make a pretty strong build crafting game even stronger. Now, moving on, one of the most important aspects of any ARPG in my opinion is having multiple characters that have different playstyles, and one of the claim to fame of Path of Exile 1 is having really good characters and multiple Ascendancies. In Path of Exile currently there are quite a few Ascendancies, all having various playstyles that make them all feel different in one way or another, and in Path of Exile 2 they actually expand on this, introducing 12 individual classes. To list them all quickly, there's the Marauder, the Warrior, the Ranger, the Huntress, the Witch, the Sorceress, the Duelist, the Mercenary, the Shadow, the Monk, the Templar, and the Druid. 6 from Path of Exile 1 transferring over directly to PoE 2, as well as 6 new classes, all with their own unique playstyle. Unfortunately, the Scion will not be playable in Path of Exile 2, but with that said, we do have 6 additional classes, which is really awesome. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the systems in Path of Exile, you actually have the ability to ascend characters, giving them various playstyles that is drastically different from each other, and generally speaking, drastically different from the initial base character himself. Path of Exile 2 will have 36 Ascendancies, essentially 36 classes with various playstyles, and while that does sound a little bit bloated because that is a lot of classes, I do think that is a mass appeal for Path of Exile because being able to play completely different playstyles compared to your friends and other peers is actually really enticing for a lot of players like myself. Now, while we're on the subject of bloating, there is some things that they're actually going to be scaling back, and that is the item system. Currently in Path of Exile 1, if you don't have a filter, your screen is loaded up with a ton of things on your screen. Typically, in my opinion, a ton of garbage that's really worthless. We've seen in the past that Path of Exile has been actively kind of moving away from tons of items more to higher rarity items, and in Path of Exile 2, that's going to be pretty much the same case. They're actually moving significantly more away from having massive amount of items to higher quality items. Now, obviously, I haven't played the end game, so I don't know exactly what it looks like in the end game, but from the footage that we've seen thus far, it's pretty clear that items that are dropped are going to be significantly more meaningful, so you're not just filling your inventory with a bunch of garbage, which in my opinion is actually pretty positive. And it doesn't stop there. There's actually going to be other areas where they actually reduce the bloat in the game, and that is the campaign. For me, the reason why I don't play every single league in Path of Exile 1 is because we have to redo the entire campaign over and over. I've ran the campaign at least 70 times at this point. I'm sick of it. I'm sorry. I know some people really love it. I don't really love it that much. I actually just rather play the end game. But regardless of where you stand on playing the campaign or not, Path of Exile 2 is going to have one less act, which in my opinion is actually going to be significantly healthier for the game. Again, if you're not a player who understands how Path of Exile 1 worked, the campaign is such a small part of the game compared to the end game because there's so many in-game systems, and it may sound bad on paper that we have one less act, but in my opinion, based on what I've seen in Path of Exile 1, having one less act is actually going to be really good for the fatigue of the game. We're going to have 12 characters that will need to be leveled if you want to play them all, and having one less act taking up time to get you to the end game is actually going to be really nice. Keep in mind, in the early access, we're only going to have 3 acts, so that's really important to note, but in terms of the game when it fully releases, we're going to have one less act. Now obviously, I just listed a ton of very positive things that's coming to Path of Exile 2, things I perceive as shortcomings to Path of Exile 1, and how does this contribute to the game's success or failing. So for me as a player, when we compare games like Path of Exile 1 to Diablo 4 to Last Epoch and many other ARPGs in the genre, the things that were listed in this video are the things that, in my opinion, made Path of Exile 1 a worse game. Not worse than those games, but a worse game. The over-reliance on the passive skill tree, the linking system that requires specific sockets for gear for skills to actually be usable, the graphics that are pretty much a decade old, not as fluid movement systems, and the itemization system that is objectively the best in the ARPG genre being reworked in a more positive light. These were the reasons why, in my opinion, if there was any games that can compete with Path of Exile was capable of competing, now all eliminated. And while I haven't necessarily said anything about grinding gear games themselves, one thing that is very important to note about GGG is that they're one of the best game development teams that I know of. I personally haven't had any interaction with them because obviously I don't really cover Path of Exile, but as a long-time player of about a decade at this point, the team has been pretty damn phenomenal. They have been consistent with the fact that the game is going to be consistently updated. The game has always been free to play. Chris Wilson seems, while I don't love all his changes, really care about the success of Path of Exile. And when you factor in all those amazing changes, I don't personally see the game failing. We could argue that the game could be overhyped in early access, but as far as I'm concerned, as a long-time avid player of Path of Exile, I don't really see Path of Exile 2 failing. The game looks like an absolute banger, and honestly, having another ARPG in the market is only going to make every other ARPG much better, so it's a welcome addition. Anyways, that's my thoughts on Path of Exile 2 and why it won't fail. Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are, what you think is going to happen when the early access come, the future of Path of Exile and Path of Exile 2. I'd like to hear what you guys think. We are doing a giveaway here on the channel as well as in the Discord for the early access coming on November the 15th. So if you do not have access or you want to possibly win a copy, feel free to jump into the Discord and check it out, or check out the link below. And just like that, Exiles, I'll see you in the next video very soon.